Greetings and good morning to you all. Good morning here anyway. One thing that I'd really like to bring up today and focus on, and that I notice a lot amongst my own students, is hip mobility issues. So I really wanted to kind of focus in today on hip mobility and small exercises that take a couple of minutes of time in your day to practice to really help you focus in on the way your hips move and create a little bit more suppleness in the hip region. So in doing that, I thought I might give you a quick anatomical lesson in regards to our posture, and then we'll bring it back down to the mat and I'll work through some key elements of forward and backward hip tilting today. So to start with, let me talk a little bit about our anatomical position when we're in standing position. So ideally, we want to think about the feet being stacked below the hip joints here, or the hip points. Then you want to think about the hips being stacked over the ankles, the shoulders being stacked over the hips, and often it will help your shoulders to rotate and curl backwards if you have your hands facing the front. That will encourage the shoulder blades to draw back a fraction. And then think about your head being stacked, or your ears being stacked over your shoulders, being stacked over your hips, with a slight tuck of the chin in. So side on, anatomically, that will look like this. Ankles aligned under the hip bones, hips aligned over the ankles, a ever so slight tuck of the hips, shoulders draw back so the palms of your hands face forward. The ears are stacked over your shoulders and your shoulders are stacked over your hips. And then slight tuck in of the chin. And breathe. You'll probably find with all those directions you're concentrating on aligning your body, but it's important to still remember to breathe. So for a moment, if you just take a hold of the front of your hip points, or around this hip region here, we're just going to talk about anterior or forward tilt of the hips or the pelvis, and posterior tilt, which is the backward tip of the pelvis. Lots of words to say too early in the morning for me here. So let's work through the forward or anterior tilt of the pelvis. So this action really helps us start our forward fold. So if you take a hold of your hands, lift your thumbs up towards your shoulders and push your hips down, you start to notice that we're creating this curve in our back. This is a forward or anterior tilt of the pelvis. And to exaggerate this, we can think of this as the ice skater who's out there performing, showing off, doing her best. So anterior tilt, and I'll just demonstrate quickly. This is the start to your forward fold. Setting yourself up with a forward tilt of the pelvis. And then we come back up. Stand in a neutral position. Bring your hands back to your hips, and the backward or posterior tilt is the opposite now. So you want to push your thumbs down. As you push your thumbs down, lift or hoik your hips up. You'll already notice that there's a curvature starting in your back. Think of this as the cowboy, ready to guns ablaze. Okay, so you can tell straight away, posture's not great, but this is just a demonstration of how the hips move forward. That initiates our forward fold. When the hips tilt back, it's a lot harder to come into this forward fold from this orientation. So this is why it's really important to look at the hips to develop your practice later on. Now, if you come down to your mat, grab a blanket. So you want a blanket that you can fold that's fairly thick, that supports your hips away from the ground. And ideally you want your knees to be lower than your hips. So we're using the blanket today to demonstrate how we can change the orientation of our hips. So if you think about how you sit normally in your day-to-day, quite often you'll find that you really sit into this lower part of your spine, which causes this roundedness of your shoulders. So by using a blanket, it encourages the hips to tilt forward. So quick demonstration here. Here's my blanket, it's quite thick. Place it on your mat so you have the corner facing forward and your sit bones can sit either side of that corner or right on the very edge of your blanket at the very least. So position your sit bones. If you're comfortable to cross your legs, this can also be practiced with your legs extended out. And then sit right on the edge, shuffle your sit bones or those bony prominences that we sit upon, shuffle them over the blanket. And then you might start to notice, and this might take some practice, you might start to notice that as soon as you encourage the sit bones over the edge of the blanket, that your hips naturally want to become more upright or at least in a slight forward orientation. Place your hands on your knees, and you might even just like to take a couple of moments here if you're comfortable to close down your eyes. And just to experience that just by creating this forward tilt in the hips, how the rest of your front body opens and expands to the full capacity and potential of your breath. For a moment, you might like to take a couple of breaths here, just breathing in, breathing out naturally. Taking a few moments for yourself to notice how this might feel completely opposite to your day-to-day posture. This is all about retraining your body bit by bit or incrementally. After a few moments or when you're comfortable, let me guide you through just a nice simple little practice that will take a moment or two of your morning or your evening just to add some lubrication to your hips and also to reinforce that forward and backward tilt of your pelvis. So in order to do that, remove any props that you have. Position your knees so they're stacked below your hips. So your body might look like a right angle in this area here. And then position your hands so they're slightly in front of your shoulder line and slightly wider than your shoulders. Okay, for your in-breath, tilt your pelvis forward. So that will look like an exaggerated arch in your spine. You might feel the skin stretching on the front of your belly. You might be aware of your heart space opening a little bit. Keep breathing as I talk. Forward tilt of the pelvis. So just take a moment to feel into that. Be aware of the positioning, be aware of their sensation and any other feelings you associate with this. And then on your next out breath, we're doing the opposite. So the hips tilt back, or those sit bones shift down, round deeply through your spine and draw your chin in towards your chest. So this is that posterior or backward tilt. And again, you'll notice this rounding that happens in the shoulders. So to move through a little quicker, inhale creates the forward tilt. Move as much with your breath as possible. And the exhale creates the posterior or the backward tilt. Breathe in. Anterior or forward tilt. This is that ice skater that we saw earlier. And as you breathe out, hips tilt back. This is the posterior tilt. Move through with 3 of your own breaths here. At the end of your next cycle of breath, let's all meet together back in a neutral spine. And there are many variations to this. So as you become more comfortable with just that movement, you might start to make your movement a bit more free. When you start to circle the body around, you're still limbering up the hips and creating hip mobility through this. So your body might act as a skipping rope as it circles all the way around the hips and itself. And then you might move in the opposite direction. You're also opening through your shoulders during this. And at any time you're ready to come off your hands and give your hands a break, bring your big toes together, take your knees apart. Modified child's pose is just resting on the forearms and relaxing their head and neck muscles. This will also protect your knees for anyone out there with knee issues. For those that have a little bit more mobility, you might draw your sit bones back towards your heels and let your arms relax or rest where they're comfortable. And take as long as you need here to absorb any of that practice. I recommend that becomes a small component of your practice as often as you can. It will remind you of your posture, it will add to your hip mobility, and it will just get you moving. So thank you for joining me. My name is Anita from Yoga on the Road.